Welcome to the Growing Tall Poppies podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nat Green, and I'm so excited to have you join me as we discuss what it means to navigate your way through post-traumatic growth and not just survive, but to thrive after trauma. Through our podcast, we will explore ways for you to create a life filled with greater purpose, self-awareness, and a deep inner peace. Through integrating the many years of knowledge and professional experience, as well as the wisdom of those who have experienced trauma firsthand, we will combine psychology, accelerated approaches, coaching, and personal experience to assist you to learn, to grow, and to thrive. I hope to empower you to create deeper awareness and understanding and stronger connections with yourself and with others, whilst also paving the way for those who have experienced trauma and adversity to reduce their suffering and become the very best versions of themselves in order to thrive. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. I'm super excited today to bring you our next guest on the Growing Tall Poppies podcast. It's my absolute pleasure and privilege to welcome a wonderful lady and beautiful friend of mine who I've known, I think, for the past 3 years. I'm really excited to introduce you to her today so that you too can get to know her and just let you know that she has had some significant adversity throughout her life and is a perfect example of a tall poppy, constantly shining her light brightly despite everything she's been through and always making a difference to others. So I feel really grateful, honoured and blessed that she said yes to being a guest on our podcast. Let me introduce Alison Dougall to you all. Alison is a coach, mindfulness teacher, clinical and counselling psychologist. So welcome, Alison. It's so great to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Nat. That was such a warm welcome. I feel really touched and really blessed. And I'm really happy to be here. I love your podcast, and I've had the opportunity to benefit from your podcast. I've had the opportunity to benefit from your coaching. So it's a real privilege to be here and be a part of it. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So I know I gave a very brief intro. Let's just start with you giving us a bit more of a version of who you are and what you do in the world.
Well, that was a pretty good introduction. I am a coach. I've got a small coaching group for women in and around their 50s to helping them find confident direction forward, find calm. And I'm a clinical and counselling psychologist. I've got a small private psychology practice working with women, a similar age group, often around menopause, perimenopause kind of challenges. Love teaching mindfulness, weaving that into coaching and into my psychology practice in evidence-based ways. And I think that pretty much sums it up. I had a previous career as a registered nurse, previous career in occupational health. Yeah, from a work perspective, that's pretty much it. I live in Scarborough in Western Australia, very beautiful part of the world. So I'm very fortunate to be able to enjoy that in my spare time.
Oh, that's fabulous. And I'm really excited that later on this year, I get to actually come over and visit you and see your side of the world and get to give you another big hug in person. So yeah, really looking forward to that.
Very exciting and a very nice birthday present for me.
It is. We'll definitely be celebrating that birthday really well. All right. So as you know, the guests that I get on the podcast are people who've been through trauma or adversity in their life. And we look at what's happened to them, to you, and how you've navigated that path and gotten through that experience. And I'll ask you about any lessons or learnings that you've had as a result of everything you've been through. And then you can share all these wonderful pearls of wisdom with our audience. So let's just give us a bit of an overview of your early life and what's happened.
Okay, that's that's a lovely open question, isn't it? So look, and I think, the early, we know our early developmental life can set a trajectory for the future. And I think it's been really influential for me. And I didn't know that there was anything unusual about my early life until I kind of got to my late 20s. And I think that's true for a lot of people that I talk to, clients that I meet. So I grew up in a home environment where my mum had mental health challenges. She's had her own trauma. And I grew up with a father who, I guess to put it politely, really, so I put it politely, he hated me and his disdain wasn't hidden. And I think, and so I really felt like it didn't feel like a safe environment growing up. For me, it felt like walking around on eggshells so as not to provoke him. And I know, someone described it the other day as walking around on glass, which is probably a better analogy because,
Mm.
in their experience, they felt like they were walking around on glass because there's not danger in walking around on eggshells, but there's, danger in walking around on glass. It didn't feel very safe. And I didn't feel like I had anyone to rely on to kind of help me navigate that. So I kind of grew up with those challenges, just kind of navigating it in my own way. And, got through, had some really successful careers, but the effects of that still hang around and have had a lot of influence on my life and continue kind of to be there in the background and to kind of need managing, really.
So that's certainly a lot, and I'm really grateful that you just openly shared that, because it's really important that we normalize that you had no idea that this wasn't what other people experienced. This was your normal. You just thought this is how it is. And for you to, navigate the mental health issues of your mum, but also to have no support system in place, and that relationship. And we all know that the relationships we have as a child and our attachments are so important. For you to have no attachment or a really negative experience of attachment with your father adds another layer, doesn't it?
It does. And it's interesting because I remember, when I was in my late 20s going for therapy, and I found this wonderful therapist and saying to her, and she was talking about my background, I'm saying to her, that's just normal, isn't it? And she said, no, actually, it's not. And we had this conversation over quite a few times for me to be able to step out of what felt like my reality of what normal was. But I know I'm not the only one. I've got friends that have had, really similar challenges. I didn't know at the time from, friends from high school and primary school. And I found out since that they were dealing with similar things at home and working with clients. I work with clients now in their kind of 45 plus, and women that have been really successful in life. And, they've raised families, they're successful in their careers. And it's only just dawning on them that some of these patterns that aren't helpful have come from that early age of whatever their adversity was. And quite often it is walking around on eggshells or glass or, the equivalent of that. Yeah.
So you said that speaking to that therapist in your 20s, that was the first realization that you had to start to share what was going on, that maybe this wasn't what everyone experienced?
Yeah, exactly. I had a few things go, was it in my late 20s? Yeah, I had a few things that weren't, actually, it might have been in my early 30s. And I had a few things that were kind of not going so well in life. And I'd seen a counselor, and that perhaps there was some benefit in that. She probably wasn't the best fit for me. And I'm really fortunate because it's really easy to not go to therapy or coaching or get some help to not look at these things. And I was doing my master's degree by then, so I must have been in my 30s. I was doing my psychology master's. And it was really kind of recommended that we do our own therapy if we're going to be therapists, which is, I think, is a great thing.
Mm.
So that was kind of probably the extra thing that got me along the line. I had no idea the size of what I was
Mhm.
dealing with or what would be coming up. And yeah, that was the first time that was really pointed out to me that it wasn't okay. That, I mean, it was a domestic violence situation
Yeah.
and it wasn't okay. And it, you know, in an ideal world, that would never happen. And I know I'm not the only person that has happened to, and everyone has their own experience, but to have someone else say to me that, you know, that wasn't okay, really, and it's not kind of in air quotes normal, yeah, it is really significant what happened. That was the first time I understood that.
Yeah. So for you to get that acknowledgement, really,
Mm.
and that understanding, and I know, it's a couple of years ago back then now. Is there anything that stuck in your mind that might have been how you responded, what you remember feeling at the time to have that acknowledgement for the first time?
Yeah, look, it felt very foreign. I think very foreign for someone to even understand what my experience had been. And I'm sure in retrospect, I know she'd heard similar stories, but for me to have someone actually get that
Mm.
was extraordinary. No one had ever listened to me with that kind of quality or understood with that kind of quality. So yeah, it was really, oh, it was amazing to have that experience. But it took me, like, it didn't feel safe to let that sink in.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I kind of really wanted to believe it was true, but I didn't feel safe to feel it was true. And so we kind of had this conversation quite a few times. I remember sometimes going, you know, kind of it's like a flipping, like changing channels to go, no, that's just normal. That's what happens to people. And then going, you know, taking the therapist perspective and going, but she said it wasn't that what everyone that isn't
Mm.
just how it is for everyone. And then eventually over time I could see, yeah, that wasn't okay. And I could really, you know, take on that perspective. And then I learned more about the from a theoretical perspective about attachment theory and went, oh, and a lot of pennies dropped over time.
Mm. Yeah, I imagine that was, quite significant as you started to let those barriers down a little bit and trust enough to actually let someone in to maybe start to believe that that could be true instead
Yes.
of the stories that you'd believe because that was what you were told constantly. And walking on that shattered glass constantly was never going to be safe.
Well, and that's right. And because the alternative story was that there was something really wrong with me,
Mm.
that I was the scapegoat in the family. If anything ever anything went wrong, I was the person that was blamed. And so the reality, other than the therapist view, that wasn't okay, that was domestic violence, was that I was fundamentally flawed.
Yeah. So and that is something that I know a lot of our listeners can relate to after we've been through something significant or long-term trauma and adversity, particularly through childhood, that we start to believe. Well, if it's been there all along, you never believe any different. You just think that's the way it is. There is something wrong with me.
Exactly. And I think there's such formative years, those early years. And I think those, you know, for me, there's the things that I remember that, but there's also things that happened before my memories we know those things that happen pre-verbally can be really influential because we never have the words to express them or share them with a therapist or coach. So yeah, those early years are really foundational.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you had this acknowledgement, this realization, this maybe there's not something completely wrong with me, and flipping back to, oh, yeah, there's something wrong with me in that initial stage, what was going on for you that might have inspired you or motivated you to take that first step towards challenging that belief and start healing?
Look, and I think I think even back then, I didn't like it's really only now, so that like some 20 odd years ago, I mean,
Mhm.
mid 50s now, to really see the size of how flawed I felt because
Mm.
it was so much shame that, and it's so uncomfortable that you even need to hide it from yourself. And so I got little snippets of it.
Mhm.
And I guess for me, since then, I've been exploring it, working towards it as I'm able. And so, yeah, so now I'm starting to realize the size of it. And I've forgotten your question because I
And it is, it can be, because it's so ingrained, it
Mm,
can be really challenging to
it is.
start to shift such significant beliefs, can't it?
Well, and it felt, to be honest, it felt like my identity. It felt like that flawedness was
Mhm.
my identity, and I had to cover that up and hide it
Mm.
rather and put a lot of effort into hiding it, or people would see how flawed I was. Rather than now, I still have times where I feel that sense of flawedness, but it is it's a small old part of me that was trying to be protective, and it's not it's not me, it's patterns in my body, and it's a part of me from the past, but it was flipped around. It's kind of maybe been all these years to be able to go from still feeling like I was a very flawed individual that needed to hide how flawed I was, and a whole lot of paddling underwater, despite, I've been really successful in a lot of, seemingly successful in a lot of careers, to now being able to recognize that feeling when it comes up and knowing that's an experience and it's not a fact or a truth. It's a part of my biology that's trying to be protective and keep me safe.
Mm. So that's a really huge shift, isn't it? To go from thinking that that was completely true, that's who you were, that's how you were, your whole identity is around that, to recognizing, maybe occasionally believing that maybe it wasn't so, but still thinking, I have to keep that part of me covered. I have to hide that, even though I might have little snippets occasionally of thinking maybe it's not true. You still felt you needed to cover that up and put this mask on and be someone else in a lot of
Exactly.
ways.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you think back over who you were back then and all the work, because you've done a lot of work over the years and constantly sought therapy and coaching and worked really hard to work on those perceived flaws, what do you think? Is there a powerful moment or milestone or a number of them that really stands out for you as to the key stepping stones of what made the difference?
Do you know, I think it's been, for me, it's been chipping away at
Mm-hmm.
that. And I think that that therapy back then, that therapist did a beautiful job, and that made, you know, a wonderful difference for me. Not, I might have been while I was still doing therapy, I did a program of mindfulness and really loved that. And I found that really beneficial with helping me regulate feelings and not necessarily buy into unhelpful thoughts. And I think so I've had a mindfulness practice for a lot of years. I've taught mindfulness to other people, love how much benefit it gives to people. And I think a third thing that's been really significant for me has actually been coaching with you.
Oh, really? What a beautiful thing to say. So I know the mindfulness is a huge part of you, what you do, and one of the things I love about you is how calm and mindful and just beautiful and grounded you seem all the time. And I know, even though you've said you often like the duck paddling crazy underwater, that's not how it feels, but that's how you present. What was it? So you felt that there was something still missing or that needed to be done. And I know we did a coaching program. What was it about the coaching program that also helped with that then?
Yeah, look, and I think what the mindfulness does is it helps me become really aware to my experience, open to what's going on. I can explore the things that feel uncomfortable. I can see whether they're helpful, and just sitting with what's uncomfortable can sometimes be enough to help it dissipate. But I think I was still carrying around the injuries from those past events.
Of course.
And I think because we know that trauma is written on the body, and it's like it's encapsulated in little bits in the body, and it stays in there. And I think the mindfulness could help me settle down the challenges that come up from that trauma and kind of work through and minimize a lot of that. But I think there's still been a lot of those kind of little capsules of events from the past that have been there living in my nervous system. When I did the coaching with you, it was like those capsules. Oh, I'm just thinking of this as I'm saying it. It's like those capsules. I feel a bit touched. It's like those capsules opened up, and oh, I'm a bit teary. The capsules opened up, and like the pain and the experience could just go and just drift away. And they didn't need to live in my nervous system anymore. And there was a lot of events that were living in my nervous system that I wasn't necessarily aware. I mean, I kind of knew generally there's a lot of the past still affecting me, but there were particular events I didn't even realize were still having such a pull on me. And it's like they were able to just release, float away like a balloon, a bubble bursting and just disappearing. And then I think what I was left with was still, so it's like it took those events out of the events still happened, but the pain of those events in my nervous system wasn't living there in my nervous system anymore.
So the emotional attachment and the emotional charge that was still stuck in your nervous system had been detached from the story or the event itself.
That's exactly right. So it was like clearing out those events in a lot of ways. They still happened, didn't have the emotional charge. And I still had the impact of them in terms of the way they'd changed my worldview. And I think that's what my mindfulness practice continues to do, is help me rejig that to a more kind of realistic perspective.
Yeah.
But it's like I didn't need to carry the events around anymore. It just really, like, it lifted the load. It's amazing.
Oh, how fabulous. And thank you. And I just watching you as you talked about that, it still deeply moves me, because I know one of the things that's really important to me is making a difference and just changing little things in someone's world. And to get that feedback and see you made me almost teary as you said that, and experience that, because I know how hard you worked and how much and how long you'd been carrying this around. And to see the change in you after you'd done the work and the process, as well as continuing with your mindfulness practices, it's made a massive difference to you, hasn't it?
It really has. And I think it continues to grow, because I could challenge those schemas and worldviews, with the mindfulness, but while I was still carrying around those kind of little capsules of trauma, it's so much harder to change the things that they're holding up. And now that they're not there, the worldviews, the beliefs that aren't helpful, they kind of collapse if you look at them closely enough. So yes, it has made a huge difference. And I know it's made a huge difference to the other people that have done your program as well. I was very, very fortunate to sneak in your beta program. But yeah, I know it's not just me, it's other people that have really benefited from that. Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life to be able to it was just a small group beta program, but to see the difference it could make in lives and to know that there can be a way forward, that people don't need to carry trauma forever, for years, and that we can really challenge our identity post-trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
Come to terms with who we are, get clear on our values, and clear out the old stuff and clear our nervous systems. It really is such powerful and life-changing stuff. So I'm loving that, and to see the beautiful people who really got such special relationships with me since doing that. It's it's what helps me get up every morning, put it that way. I love it.
Yeah.
It
Well, and
lights
I
me up.
guess that's the reason I had to mention it, because it didn't feel enough to kind of talk about, my experience of the process that you use. I went, you can talk about that, but, and you're right, it is amazing. It's made a huge difference to me. But I guess it isn't doing it justice to say it's not just me, it's other people we were in a group and we shared the experience. And yeah, it was wonderful seeing the benefits that other people got from the program, really life-changing benefits people got from the program.
That's beautiful. And I think that's the power of community, isn't it? That as human beings, we need connection and a sense of belonging. But after trauma and adversity, we often isolate. We have issues with trust, with safety, all sorts of things. So we might have people around us, but we often don't have the deep relationships that we like or that we would like. So having a safe community and a way to do that is really powerful, and also really amazing as far as the healing journey goes post-trauma, isn't it?
Yes, you're right. So the community, the safe space, and the leadership. I don't want to, because I'm harping on this a little bit, because to not take the light off what you've put together with your technique, the community is really important, and your technique is really just amazing in its ability to make changes in a lot of people's lives, and your ability to, and it comes across in your podcast as well, your ability to create that safe space and your leadership, with your technique as well.
Oh, thank you. Now I'm really embarrassed because I brought you on the podcast for you to share your story and not make anything about me or any of the other stuff we've done. And you've really embarrassed me. So yeah, you got me there.
That's why I didn't want to, you steered away from it. I didn't want to let you off the hook, because it's really important part of actually the true story. And I really feel it's important to tell a true story. And that's the true story. And that's why I didn't want to let you wriggle off the hook with that.
Thank you, Alison. I very much appreciate you putting me on the spot.
Just to not sabotage, just to kind of take over your podcast. But
well, I do. I really am grateful that you felt comfortable enough to share that. Certainly not why I brought you on. However, yeah, I'm very grateful, because I do really value the podcast, what we're doing, the community. And, if we can share that even more, then that's great as well.
It is. And do you know what? It's about your tall poppiness, because if I hadn't just kept saying what I needed to say, then it would have been letting you not be a tall poppy. And I think this is you being a tall poppy, is everything that you offer in terms of what you do in the field of trauma with your podcast, the work that you do in general. And so you're not allowed to shrink away from it either, if we're not allowed to.
Okay, I'm going to stand tall, and I'm about the same color red as the red poppies on the screen right now. Thank you for that. For anyone who's watching the video rather than just listening on the podcast. Now, let's go back to your story.
Okay, fair enough.
I said, very grateful. So if you want to look at How do you think your experiences, all the childhood adversity, everything you carried through into adulthood, and then all the various things you've worked really hard on to work through and now really stand strongly in post-traumatic growth, not stuck in the trauma. How have those experiences transformed your perspective now on life, relationships, and your personal values?
That's a big question, but I think, look, I really love the experience of personal growth, and I just really appreciate that the past has given me so much opportunity for personal growth. And I even remember as a teenager feeling quite distressed, but knowing that there were positives in the experience from the growth that I could get from it.
Mm,
And so I think that was a fortunate strength for me to carry through, and whatever's happened at some point, I can kind of connect with the growth experience out of it.
yeah.
So it's definitely made me a better therapist and coach to
Mhm.
know what that feels like in your nervous system to be experiencing that. No, I don't know what everyone's adversity was like, but to have a sense of what it feels like at a young age to be experiencing adversity and what that does to people's nervous system, and have a real felt sense of what that can feel like.
Mm,
I think as well, all of the things that I've done since to kind of do what I can to put that in the past have really helped me be really positive about the potential for growth, what is possible after adversity, after trauma, what just the wonderful things that do come out of that growth. And it makes me really positive and optimistic for people that I work with from that lived experience.
oh, that's amazing. So, definitely one of your special qualities and personal attributes is the ability to see the positive and the lessons and learnings from negative experiences. Are there any other specific qualities or things that you see as key for helping someone move from trauma into post traumatic growth?
Yeah, a big question. So key is really absolutely someone being able to own and allow their experience. I think so often so much of that gets shut down, or it's not recognized,
Mm,
or it gets minimized by other people, or it gets minimized by ourselves. I think allowing the full expression of that. I think understanding a lot of times, I think understanding the physiology of trauma helps people understand that it's the human condition to have the reactions to trauma that we have,
yes.
and we often want to blame ourselves or consider that it's just us, when in fact our body's doing this for protective reasons and really logical, not our logic, but from a physiological, really logical from that perspective. And when we know the logic, it helps us work out the puzzle to how we move through it.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, yeah, definitely. So acknowledging and
Allowing,
owning,
giving it space, a safe
yeah,
space. Yeah.
absolutely. But definitely that recognition that it will be stored somewhere in our body. We don't ever, and as any human being going through anything, just day to day life, all our experiences are stored within our body. So recognizing and coming up with a practice that will help us let that go or process it, whether that be talking things through, meditation, mindfulness, TRE, like we talked about a few weeks ago. And I know you've had the experience of TRE and it was helpful in also
Mm.
letting go of some of that stored trauma. So they're really important things. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. What about, I'm just thinking, one of the questions that I like to ask the podcast guests are if you could share one thing with our listeners that would help them as they navigate their post-trauma or adversity experiences that would help them move into post-traumatic growth, what would that one thing be?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think I'm going to be a bit sneaky and kind of have two answers
Who's
because
fine? The more the merrier.
it's the one about always kind of finding the support that's right for you. And if the support you're linked in with doesn't feel right for you, then just if you can keep trying to find the right support, because the first person you're going to find isn't always the best person to help you. And if you persevere, you'll get there eventually with the right person or the right modality that is for helping you.
Yeah.
But I think something that has been really helpful for me and has helped me continue, and it's linked into my shift from therapy to coaching, is when I studied nursing back in the 80s, the late 80s. And I've heard a psychiatrist say the same thing, that when we did our training, the wisdom of the day was that we were born with as many brain cells as we were going to have, and it was just a matter of attrition with aging and alcohol use. And in fact, we know now there's so much more potential for our brain with being able to grow new parts of the brain, being able to grow new connections in the brain, and that we have so much more control over the growth of our brain than we've ever understood. The technology that's come out in the last 30 years has just absolutely demonstrated that. And for me, my mindfulness practice, watching other people with their mindfulness practices, absolutely demonstrated that, where we choose to put our attention has a huge impact on the way our brain and our mind functions. And I'm just really excited about where the upper limit for that is. So for me, being someone in my mid-50s, I don't want to settle for okay. I want to settle for what's the best that my mind and body and brain can get to. And I just want to push the limits and go, well, I'm in a good space now. I have challenges, but I want to find out what's possible for our minds, for our brain. And I guess for whatever stage anyone's at, whether they're kind of feeling at the early stage of their post-traumatic growth, I think that's just knowing that there is so much scope. There's a lot of modalities. There's a lot of scope for change if we can find the right fit for us, through to, even if we feel like we're in a good spot, if anyone else wants to jump on board with how good can it get?
Yes.
And I think from the medical model, we tend to go, oh, well, that's healthy enough. Let's leave it there. But I'm just really excited about that space of how good can we make it with our well-being. So I don't think we need to kind of stop it. Okay.
Oh, brilliant advice, Alison. So definitely I absolutely agree. It's definitely not a one size fits all. And, talked about the old way that we were trained and that medical model of this is how it is. And both of us with the background in clinical psychology and now moving into coaching for various reasons and many reasons that we won't go into on today's podcast. But
it's a whole other episode.
It's another whole episode. That whole idea that psychology deals with problems. And once we've solved the problem, fixed the issue, whatever it is, however way we look at it, that's it. It's a one and done and move on. So the way you've worded that and really look forward to, well, what's the best I can be? There's no upper limit. We know that our brains, there's neuroplasticity, so we can continue to, like you said, change our neural pathways, rewire our brains. So there's no finish line. We just keep going and keep going. And we're both in our mid-50s. We've got many, many years ahead, hopefully. And who knows, now that we're future focused and looking through a post-traumatic growth lens rather than a post-traumatic stress disorder lens, things
Yes,
are totally
exactly.
different.
That's exactly right. And I think for me, I would say when I was running in-person mindfulness groups, and mindfulness is a simple practice, but it's not easy. And people would get benefit from it for a few weeks but still find it challenging to continue with. And I'd say, well, look, if you've had this much benefit in 3 weeks, imagine if you multiplied that by 6 weeks or 12 weeks or 12 months.
Yeah.
And I think for me, if I've had this much personally has this much benefit from mindfulness over the years I've been doing it, then if I multiply it by that many years again, it's so exciting to think what's possible. And mindfulness is just one modality. So yeah, it's so exciting.
It is. We really are alive in the most exciting time in history, because it really was. You're born with these brain cells and you get less and less every day until there's none left. And we know that that's not true. We now know that we can continue to change our brain and use it, obviously looking after it as much as possible, but continuing to learn, to grow, will always bring the hope that we're looking for in the future, won't it?
Exactly.
Oh, that's great. So, Alison, as we move to wrapping up the conversation, where can our listeners find out more about you and find you online?
I wasn't prepared for that question, but it was the obvious one, wasn't it? So I'll give you my coaching details, and if someone happens to be interested in psychology, then they can find my psychology through that.
Mm-hmm.
It is thethriving.space.com,
Okay.
or one word, the thriving space. Or on socials, I'm not doing a lot on socials, but I'm there. Alison Dougall Coaching that's my Facebook business coaching address, and my Instagram coaching address as well.
Okay. And we'll put all of that in the show notes anyway, so everyone can find you. And I would absolutely highly recommend connecting with Alison. She's amazing. And we didn't even touch on your experience recently about your big trip over to be with one of the big mindfulness gurus. So we might need to get you back on another podcast to talk a bit more about your recent trip over to the Himalayas.
Well, yeah, that would be lovely. I'd love to do that. But I don't want to give the impression that I went more than to the Himalayas than to watch them from a distance at the sunrise. But I didn't do any climbing or hiking in the Himalayas, but I did go to a mindfulness, some teachings with a Buddhist monk that I very much respect and admire. So yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk more about that.
Yeah, so we might get you on to talk more about what you learned there and some other learnings that might be of benefit to our listeners, because I do think, exactly as you said, it's about finding the right fit and the right practice for you. And it might be a blend of a number of different things. It's not a one size fits all.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
true.
Awesome. So thank you so much for coming on today and sharing all those pearls of wisdom. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really love what you're doing, and I really love that you're creating a space for more discussion around this, because I think it needs more discussion, and the more it's not discussed, the more people feel like it's just them, and the more people feel alone. So I love that you're creating that safe space for it to be opened up for more discussion.
Thank you. Bye for now.
See you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me in this episode of Growing Tall Poppies. It is my deepest hope that today's episode may have inspired and empowered you to step fully into your post-traumatic growth, so that you can have absolute clarity around who you are, what matters the most to you, and to assist you to release your negative emotions and regulate your nervous system so you can fully thrive. New episodes are published every Tuesday, and I hope you'll continue to join us as we explore both the strategies and the personal qualities required to fully live a life of post-traumatic growth and to thrive. So if it feels aligned to you and really resonates, then I invite you to hit subscribe, and it would mean the world to us if you could share this episode with others who you feel may benefit too. You may also find me on Instagram at Growing Tall Poppies and Facebook, Dr. Natalie Green. Remember, every moment is an opportunity to look for the lessons and to learn and increase your ability to live the life you desire and deserve. So for now, stay connected, stay inspired, stand tall like the tall poppy you are, and keep shining your light brightly in the world. Bye for now.